Hello, friends of Madly Musings podcast. It's Jaime Jo Wright today, and we have Sarah Sundin back with us. Hello, Sarah.
Hello. Thanks for
And
having me.
yes, I love having you on the show because we always have such interesting conversations. And I think part of it's because of the genre that you write in. It's just intriguing. But
You
World War
also
II,
ask great questions.
well, well, I don't know. World War II fiction is just so intriguing, and there's so many layers and elements to it.
Yeah, they
So,
certainly are.
yeah. So you have a book that is releasing February 6th, and it's
Yes.
called Embers in the London Sky.
I don't have the
There's the
book yet, but
cover.
by the time this comes out, I'm sure the books will be out there, but there's a pretty
Probably.
cover.
That's a gorgeous cover. It's a gorgeous cover. There's so
Yeah.
much in that cover too. I mean, I was staring at it, literally staring at it, the other day, and I was trying to think what it was because every time I saw the cover, um, I don't even know how to describe it, and I'm a writer, but it was like this little hitch in my emotion, if that makes sense. Like I'll see lots of covers and go, "Oh wow, that's gorgeous" or whatever. But this one like
Yeah.
hitched my emotion. I was trying to figure out what it was, and I figured out I think it's because you have this destruction in the back and the sparks
Mm,
kind of in the air, and there's a child. I
yeah.
think it's the child because it got
Yeah.
that mom part of me where I was just like, I want to jump through and just pull him to safety.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really kind of the heart of this book too, is
Uh-huh.
the she's searching for her child um, in the Blitz, and how that tugged at my heart as a mom and a new grandma and
Hmm.
um, children in peril, and that was going on during the Blitz. Even with the evacuations, there were a lot of children who were still in London experiencing the bombings. So
Right.
there was that's actually a theme that keeps coming up during the story is these children who had to deal with things. Even those who were evacuated
Mm.
um, were not living at home. They weren't in with their families, and some
Right.
of them were in great situations with families that really cared for them, and lots of fun and living in the country excitement. And some were with families who cared nothing for them.
Mm.
Some were obviously you do that type of situation. Some were abusive. Some were just cruel, like using
Yeah.
them as slave labor, that type of
Yeah.
thing. So the children's experience is varied, and so the heroine in the book ends up working for the Ministry of Health, which was
Okay.
responsible for the evacuation. So she just takes on a project in her search for her son. She takes on this project of going out to the country and
Hmm.
interviewing children, interviewing the foster parents and the billeting
Okay.
officers to get an idea of what was going on. So
Yeah.
she can, and she's kind of um, stunned by what's going on. And so just exploring what was, so even those who weren't in the city weren't necessarily having a great time. So for to be a
Yeah.
child in England during the war was very difficult, no matter where you were.
It had been pretty traumatic. It brings to mind, I mean, it's silly, but it brings to mind the Chronicles of Narnia because you read about the
Yeah.
three or four Pevensey siblings, and they're going off to this house. And I don't know if a lot of people realize that was during the Blitz, that these kids
Yes.
at the beginning of Narnia are being sent to this old man's house.
Yeah.
They discover the wardrobe, and that is a whole other story. But I've always thought about that when I think about the Blitz, is those kids leaving the train station to go into the country.
I think that's one thing the most recent movie showed. They had a little prequel that
Right.
wasn't in the book with them living through the Blitz, and I think that
Yep.
give that historical context for the
Mm.
modern reader. It's like this is why they were doing this, because
Right.
staying in at home with their loving parents was not safe.
Right.
And so they were going to this house with this man who seemed indifferent, and they were forced to make up their own games and
Right.
explore and
Right.
search for connection, and all they
Right.
had was each other, it
Right.
seems. So
Right.
yeah, I think that's I think it really shows some of the what was
Hmm.
going on,
Hmm.
at least for one family, in a very typical
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so tell us a little bit. I'm looking at the back cover copy. We have your heroine who escapes to London from the Netherlands, which I thought was an interesting. Now, why would she have escaped from the Netherlands to London? Tell me the history there, because I'm lost on that one.
She has an aunt, a Dutch aunt, who married an Englishman.
Okay.
And lives in England. And she and her cousins used to go over to England when she was growing up for the summers. And then she ended up going to school there. Most of her
Okay.
cousins did. Her cousins will be in the next couple books in this Not Quite a Series.
Oh, okay.
And
Not quite.
so,
I like that. Not quite a series.
yeah, exactly. Because I'm not even sure if they're going to meet each other during
Okay.
the other books, but they
Yeah.
are just because of the situations of their stories, they may not be able to meet each other.
Hmm.
But anyway, so Aleida comes to the Netherlands. She wants to escape. For her original plan is she's in an abusive marriage,
Okay.
and she plans to take her little 3-year-old son and escape to England to get away from her husband. And the day she's planning to do it is the day the Germans invade.
Oh.
And her husband says, "We are leaving. You have a family in the Netherlands, don't you? Get in the car. We're going."
Hmm.
And now she's terrified because how can now she can't escape from her husband.
Right.
And as they're on the road, he has no love for his little boy. Little Theo was born missing the fingers on his hand,
Okay.
and so
Yep.
he sees him as a freak.
Hmm.
This is partly my own experience. My oldest son, my little boy of
Your little
30,
boy.
was
Yes.
born missing his left. Yes,
Yes.
so
He's
my little boy.
always your little boy.
He
It
has a
doesn't matter
beard.
how old.
I know he has a beard. He has his own baby, but he's my little boy. But he
Yes.
was born missing his arm below the elbow. So,
Oh,
but
okay.
of course, we all adored him,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he was never treated. He's he's adapted very well. But I
Yeah.
know with a lot of families with children's disabilities, sometimes
Hmm.
there can be lots of problems, and especially if you have a man who has that controlling, abusive
Yeah.
nature,
Yeah.
like who'd you sleep with to get the situation. So
Hmm.
anyway, he does
Hmm.
not like his son, and so one night they're sleeping on the road, and he takes the little boy and throws them into a car, a family bound for London, and tells Aleida, "Yeah, we'll meet them up again in London."
Oh my
And
gosh.
that was based on something that happened historically. When I was
No.
reading, yes, when I was researching for Until Leaves Fall in Paris, which was set obviously in
Right.
Paris during the war, and I was reading about the invasion. Now you've seen the pictures where there are literally millions of refugees on the road trying to
Yeah.
escape from the Germans, and the planes are strafing. um, these families were panicking, and most of these people were on foot. And if some of them saw a car and said to themselves, "My child stands a better chance with strangers in a car, can get further away than we will on foot," and they would throw their children into cars. But then they would arrive in Lisbon, or they would end up back at their homes after everything settled down, and they couldn't find their children. And the newspapers in France were coated with these classified ads of people trying to find their children. And oh, devastating, broke my
Oh
heart.
my
And
gosh.
what if you have a child? So that's why Teo
Yeah.
is only 3 years old. He's old enough to say his first name, but not his last name. He probably
Oh,
can't say his
baby.
parents' names. And so, he's old enough to remember mommy, but maybe not doesn't know mommy's name.
Right.
And
Right.
so, like, so that's when I came up with the idea of Aleida losing her son, and all she knows is that it's a family bound for England, and her husband is killed the next day, and she goes to England alone trying to find her son. So, but while she's there, she meets Hugh Collingwood, who is a um, BBC radio correspondent, and she thinks that he can help her find her son.
Mm.
Um, so that's how they meet. And meanwhile, he's reporting on the Blitz and trying to, um, make a name for himself
Yeah.
and all that stuff. So,
Well, now my heart really itches when I see that cover.
oh, no.
I'm remembering my little boy when he was 3. I'm like, oh, every mama bear instinct in me raises. And you think about the fact that your mama bear instinct raises to protect the child, and yet
Yeah,
that might have been the best way to protect the child. And it's so contradictory to,
exactly.
oh,
Exactly.
heart-wrenching.
And that's something that Aleida wrestles with throughout the whole story is
Yeah.
um when she finds her son, is it best to take him back? Does he remember? What if he doesn't
Oh.
remember her? Is it best to uproot him again? I mean, she starts
Mhm.
to have all these thoughts about
Mhm.
what, and is she acting for herself out of her desire to have her
Yes.
child with her, or in the best
Yes.
interest of the child? And it's she faces this really heart-wrenching situation that no parent should ever have to
Mm-mm.
face of, searching for her child and not having any idea where he might be, or even if he's alive, of course.
Alive, right.
And so, and she's an anxious personality anyway. She's
Mhm,
we would probably now say she has OCD.
mhm.
She lines things up, she counts things, she repeats, she has all these little rituals she does to keep her life in control. And now her
Mhm.
life is completely out of control. And it's a hard situation for her. And I my heart just
Gosh,
broke for her the entire story.
no one
So
can ever accuse you of being nice to your characters. I'm just gonna
no,
say that, you know? I mean, granted, you're writing during World War II, so there's a little bit of grace I can give you on that,
bombs
but
falling.
wow.
Yeah, no, I
Oh man. Okay, so the Netherlands would have been Holland.
Mhm.
Is Holland pretty much the Netherlands or similar to
Yeah,
the
it's
Netherlands?
we call it Holland, but technically Holland is a province within the Netherlands.
Okay.
And but yeah, we use it interchangeably, but the Dutch don't like that. So they call it
Okay.
the
The
Netherlands.
Netherlands. Okay, so there's the Netherlands. And then I'm equating, this is what my brain does. I think of World War II and then I kind of try and position things. So that would have been where Corrie Ten Boom and
Yes.
her family were hiding the
Yes.
Jewish people in their home. And that's where
Yes.
Aleida was running from as someone
Yes.
from the Netherlands to London. Okay.
So she never had to experience life under the Nazis
Okay.
because she got out in
Get
time, but
out.
she did experience the chaos of the
Hmm.
invasion and the danger of the
Yeah.
invasion.
Yeah. Well,
So
you just think
yeah,
about the displacement of families.
I know.
And I don't by any form or shape want to diminish what happened with the Jewish community, but you also don't always think about how it also affected the non-Jewish communities as well in that area.
Loss of homes due to
Hmm.
bombing,
Hmm.
um, all sorts of things. People just, the father's away. What happens to the mother?
Yeah.
Yeah, there. And then obviously, as the war progressed, people fleeing from their homes.
Hmm.
So after the war, there were tens of millions of people in these displaced persons camps. A lot of them were
Hmm.
concentration camp prisoners who were free, but they had nowhere to go to, and
Right.
people who lost their homes due to bombing or just due to war
Right.
and their families. It was just chaos in Europe after the war, just absolute chaos.
Yeah. Yeah, man. Okay, so let's switch over. We have Hugh Collingwood. He's the BBC radio correspondent, which throws in a whole other angle from the standpoint that you always hear those reels and those things like this is the
Yes,
BBC, you know. So tell me a little bit about that because that was probably maybe a more fun and entertaining part to research.
it was.
Okay.
It was a lot of fun. So learning about the BBC, and that was partly because when I wrote When Twilight Breaks, that the heroine in that was a newspaper correspondent
Okay.
in Berlin, in Munich before the war in 1938, and I found the journalistic community so fascinating.
Hmm.
I mean, they're so witty and this high-paced back and forth banter and this interesting community of intense competition and yet support.
Okay.
So very interesting, but all these extremely intelligent,
Yeah.
well-read people who knew what was going on. And so I kind of wanted to dip my toes back in that community again.
Uh-huh.
And so when my publisher and I decided to I had a few ideas of where I had my story for Aleida, but I wasn't quite sure where it was going to be.
Okay.
And when my editor says, well, you have to set one during the Blitz. Like, yeah, that'd be kind of fun. And then I could
Hmm.
do a BBC correspondent.
Yeah.
So, and of course, radio. And I didn't really think about it. We look about radio. It's old fashioned. It was in, the World
Hmm.
War II, but World War One, there was no radio. It really developed in '20s. So in the '30s.
Oh, you're
So
right.
this was, I know.
I mean, not
I had
saying
it
that I
real, I had
doubted you, but I'm like, it never dawned on me. Like,
it never, and I don't know how many, I've written quite a few World War II
mhm,
books. And this is the first time I'm like, oh, yeah, this is the first
it's a new
war
thing.
where radio was important. So
Yeah.
they were learning how to report by radio.
Mhm.
It was a whole new thing. And before the war, the BBC, they had news readers. So more like our anchors,
Okay. Yeah.
So they would read the news,
Okay.
in front of the microphone in the BBC studios. And they had just pioneered what they called outdoor broadcasts, and they mostly used
Okay.
them for sports. So they'd go to a horse race, and they had a guy, and they had to engineer an entire different type of microphone to use that would pick up his voice and some of the background noise, but
Wow.
not all the crowd and all that. And so the engineering behind how you do an outdoor broadcast was really very interesting. And so they had just started doing that in the late 30s, and so now there's the war. And the journalists, the correspondents want to be out there recording,
Mhm.
but there are technical problems with recording out in the open. There were, the machines they had to use were enormous, and how do
Mhm.
you work that out?
Right.
So there were some technical issues. There were, I don't want I'll use the word censorship as
Mhm.
opposed, but it's not quite truly what I would call censorship. And this
Okay.
is this is another theme in the book. It's like, when is it censorship and when is it, we want about freedom of speech, and
Mhm.
censorship is the two extremes. But what about when we need to have appropriate discretion? And
Mm.
so they were balancing this, because at this point they had the Ministry of Information in Britain, which
Mhm.
wanted to control what information was going out to the population. And BBC was not, it's a weird little thing where it's kind of governmental, but it's not.
Yeah.
They have a
Mhm.
charter with the government, but they are not controlled by the government. But in the BBC charter, there was a provision that in times of war, the Ministry of Information could take over the BBC and
Okay.
control it.
Okay.
And so the BBC did not want that. And so they were self censoring. And at the beginning, they erred on the side of too much caution. And they really started to take a lot of flack for that, um, with people joking about,
Yeah.
you know, but he knew what was going on and the BBC wasn't reporting it.
Right. Right.
And trying to find that right balance between reporting the truth
Mhm.
and, when does reporting the truth hurt the population? Obviously, and during the war, it'd be, oh, here is a bomb falling right at the corner of Regent Square, right at Regent Square. And
Right.
the Nazis are like, so, okay, now we can adjust our navigation accordingly.
Yeah.
So you want to be so accurate, that because they could pick up those radio broadcasts in Germany. So you had to be very careful that they weren't giving comfort to the enemy by
Ooh.
providing information.
Yeah.
So they didn't have broadcasts, because the way the weather flowed, um,
Oh, that would have yeah.
exactly. So then that would give the Germans information. Well, then we don't have to worry about a bombing rate tonight because the weather's lousy. And
Right.
so, uh,
Oh
all
my
these things that you don't
goodness.
think about.
Mm-mm.
So they had to be there was a point where they had to be very careful in the reporting not to tip off the
Yeah.
Germans. But on the other hand, if they were like saying, yes, we didn't lose any ships, we haven't lost any ships at all, none, none, none. And yet families are getting reports that their sailors have died. So
Oh,
there gets the point of being ridiculous. So they were this constant
wow.
battle, especially early in the war,
Mhm.
1940, 41, between the certain members of BBC, certain members of the
Mhm.
Ministry of Information. Some people in the Ministry of Information were all, for what the BBC wanted, but there was this little back and forth. And actually, what was worse was the armed forces. The armed forces really wanted very strict censorship.
Okay. Yeah.
So and so, there was this battle, and they were actually trying to interfere directly with BBC. So there was this very interesting interplay of governmental organizations and this semi-governmental, and it was the only radio broadcasting company in Britain,
Okay.
by charter. It's the only one. In
Okay.
America, we have CBS, we had BBC,
Right.
we had NBC, we had Mutual. They were all these local ones that were independent.
Mhm.
So it was a different situation. But in Britain, there's only one at the time. They
Yeah.
had a couple channels, we
Yeah.
what we call channels, but they didn't have they only had one organization. So really interesting to and then just reading up about the real fun pop culture parts that the shows that were popular and the songs that were popular
Yeah.
and just the little catchphrases they had that were popular with the BBC. And so just it was kind of fun diving into that more lighthearted pop culture part of it, but
Right.
still with the heaviness of how do we balance freedom of speech versus morale versus um, keeping the public safe.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun. And so I had my Hugh and his reporter friends have lots of fun conversations
I love it.
about this stuff.
I love
And
it.
Aleida's watching kind of back and forth like a tennis game and she
Like,
loves it.
oh my goodness, what's going on? Well, and you think about it too, like if with radio, I mean, really, it's new technology too. So it's not like it's like you said, it's not like all of this had been standardized and there was a process.
Exactly.
Oh man.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I'm
they were
thinking about,
making it they go.
yeah. Yeah. And you would want to
Yeah.
do
By
weather
the time
reports because that helps the German pilots know what the wind direction was.
exactly.
And oh my goodness.
But by the time they hit D-Day,
Hmm.
they had lots of reporters on the ground landing with the troops. And by the time
Wow.
that time, BBC had developed a small recording device about the size of a shoebox, that type of thing, that the men they jumped from airplanes carrying this thing, recorded, and were able to send their recorded broadcasts back to England. Now they couldn't transmit it like we would. They had to, take the disc and
Hmm.
send it
Messenger or whatever.
back
Yeah.
to England.
Hmm.
So it was delayed by a couple days or longer,
Yeah.
but still they had the sounds of these men on the beaches of Normandy.
Oh,
And those are amazing to listen to.
I
But
bet.
by that, I mean, it started off, they had the equipment in a van. And by the time of D-Day, they had it down to the size of a suitcase.
Wow.
So just incredible technological advances during the war. And
Yeah.
he was kind of in the early to middle phase. It's a
Yeah.
1941 at the time of the story.
That's
So
awesome.
he still has the van, but he's battling for the right to use it because his
Yeah.
his boss is kind of on his case.
Oh my gosh, this sounds so fun. This sounds so fun. All right.
It was a fun story.
So we started with heartbreak. We're ending with fun. That's okay. I can
Yeah.
deal with that. But so the book is called Embers in the London Sky. It's by Sarah Sundin. It is released on February 6th. And you can probably do pre-orders now when you're listening to this podcast because it won't have been released yet. So you can head over to bakerbookhouse.com, get it for 40% off and free shipping and all that fun stuff. So is there anything else listeners should know, or where should they find more about you and your books?
Oh, well, my website is sarahsundin.com, and I have links there to all my social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or whatever we're calling it by the time this podcast comes out. I joined Threads. I'm not doing much there.
Right.
So yeah, I need to have a
You're
footprint
around.
there, but
You're around. We can find you
yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, I'm all over.
Oh man. Well, this was fun. I look forward to reading it. And readers, if you read it, leave a review. Reviews are so helpful for authors. And this is one you definitely want to add to your to be read because Booklist has already given it a star review, which means it's a must read. Watch for it when it comes out. So good to have you with us today, Sarah. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you again.